Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video features one of the new stamp sets by Heffy Doodle. This one is called You're Weird, and I love to create with critters. And so this is kind of up that alley, but just a little bit different in that these are little aliens. So I'm really enjoying this stamp set. To begin with, I'm taking a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I've got it in my Misti. And then I took most of the stamps from the stamp set, and I'm going to stamp them out using Memento Tuxedo Black ink. These are both Copic friendly products, and I'm going to color in my images using Copic markers. For the background, I wanted to create a nighttime scene. So I've got a piece of Bristol smooth cardstock, and I've cut out a circle from some masking paper. And then I've added that masking piece over into the top right corner, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of ink blending. I'm starting with Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide, and I am using my blender brush. I went over on just the outer edges of the moon with the lightest shade, and then I brought that lightest shade to the bottom of the scene. And then I'll take the next darkest shade, which I picked Mermaid Lagoon, and then I'm just building the color up onto those areas. To create this as a nighttime scene, I brought in chipped Sapphire Distress ink, and that will go over across majority of that panel. And this color is really, it's a lot darker than what I had been using at this point, and so this will be what sets my night scene. And then I do use Distress ink in Black Soot just at the top of the scene to darken that up. Once I have all those first layers on, I do like to go back a couple of times over the entire scene with the same shades I had been using, just to build up the color and remove any of those harsh lines that sometimes we can get. Once I have that panel the way I want it, I went in with some water and I spritzed it, and then I blot that up with a clean paper towel. Now I realize I went a little overzealous here with the water, but that's okay. Once I add all my other elements, it's not going to be that obvious. And then of course the big reveal, to remove the mask, I got my white spot where I'm going to add the moon. For one of the elements in my card, I'm using the Cityscape die by Sunny Studios. This is a new die that was just released this past summer, and I've got it, I had it on a piece of black cardstock and I die cut that out, and then I wanted to build a little bit of a dimension with that die. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking a piece of white cardstock, and then I'm taking a double-sided adhesive sheet, and I'm adding that just to the one side. Once I trim that off, I will go ahead and align my die right on top of that, and then I can cut out several of those layers to create that dimension. Plus I have a ready-made light of sorts in the background. I used a large rectangle stitch die to die cut that panel, and now I'm ready to stamp out my sentiment. Here I'm just lining up my dies so I know exactly where the sentiment should line up. I'm just kind of using it as a guide. The sentiment I chose for this card reads, "Love you to the moon and back," hence why I really wanted that moon to be prominent in this card. I'll go ahead and line up my stamp as straight as I possibly can, and then I wanted to emboss that sentiment, so I am treating my panel with anti-static powder, and then I'm using some embossing ink, and then when I stamp that down, I'm going to use some white embossing powder to set that in place. And then I'll just use my heat tool to heat the embossing powder, and that's my sentiment. At this point, I'm ready to start adding all of the elements to my card. And so I'm taking one of the die cuts from the black cardstock that I did of the Cityscape die, and I'm just adhering those together. Once I've added, I think I've added like 2 layers, maybe 3, I'm taking that white die cut, and the reason why I did that white one so that I don't have to have I wanted the windows in the background so that it looks like they're projecting light. So some of those little windows just popped out of place, which was not that big of a deal, just to pick them up with my tweezers and add them back into place. Yeah, they were a little sticky. Anyway, once I had those back in, I go ahead and take that last die cut off to the left, and I added to the top, and that is my Cityscape. And then once I had those in, I just used some liquid adhesive to add that last layer. And then I took a black marker and just went around the edges of that die so that any of the white that may have been showing, I colored in. I've got a piece of acetate inside my Misti, and I'm going to stamp out the glass part of what would be his little spaceship. I'm using Staz on. Once I remember to remove the outer covering, I'm inking the stamp up with Staz on, and that ink is specifically designed for non-porous surfaces like acetate so that it won't smudge. And then I just use my scissors to trim around the edges and fussy cut that image out. So here's kind of what that looks like. I'm going to adhere the acetate to the back of the spaceship using some liquid adhesive, and try very carefully not to shift that around too much. And then I can go ahead and adhere the little alien so that he looks like he's in his own little spaceship with a glass. So here I'm just kind of playing around with the placement of my images and trying to figure out what the best way to add them in. And so after coloring all of the images in, I decided I'm going to try to use them all. So the plan was now to create a sidewalk for the other little aliens. And all I did was I took a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I'm just using the cool gray markers to, oh, I guess I am going to use the ruler. Okay. I'm just going to draw in some lines, and I'm using a one of the darker cool grays. I think this may be a C7. And then once I have those sidewalk lines in, I go ahead and I start blending out with the lighter shades. I take the next lighter shade and I'm just adding shading to one side of that line that I drew. I believe this is C5. I'm not 100% certain. And then I go in with yet a lighter shade and I realize that the shade needs to be filled. My marker was running out of ink, so I decided to make him darker so that it would look a little bit more like a sidewalk. And so when I line it up, it looks okay, but I think I do go ahead and add another line, and I just freehand it. And then I'll do the same process again. I'll just add shading and keep blending until it looks good. I'm just using my scissors to trim that panel off, and then just using liquid adhesive, and I can add that to the bottom of my scene panel. And I realize it's crooked, but it's okay. The Cityscape die is going to go on top of that. I'm using my T-square ruler to make sure that is aligned straight, and then I'll put something heavy like my acrylic block on top of that to press it in place. And then all that's left to do is just add my little characters. I've got the spaceship alien. He's popped up on some foam tape, and then I can just remove the backing off of that and add him into place, as well as my little blue alien. I do go ahead and off screen add the third little alien that I colored in purple, and you'll see that in the end photographs. Here I'm just adding a little bit of shading to that moon, just so it's not completely stark white. I've left the caps out. I think it's C1 and C0, and then I bring in a very light blue shade. I will have all of the Copic markers I used to create this card listed on my blog, which I will link to down below. Here I'm going in with this Ranger, I think it's like a mini ink tool. There was a corner that had been ink blended with blue, so I just went in with that little tool and covered it up with some white pigment ink. Here's where I decide my third little alien's gonna come in, and I adhere him down. And the only thing left to do to finish this card off is add that panel to an A2 size card base. Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I always appreciate reading your comments and would love to hear what you think of this card. Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Bye.